The espresso machine hissed its final breath at 9:47 p.m., and I was grateful for the silence that followed. Moretti's Corner Cafe was supposed to close at 9. But the last customer, a college student who'd been nursing a cold latte for 3 hours, had finally packed up her textbooks and left. Now it was just me, the smell of coffee grounds, and the familiar rhythm of closing duties that let my mind go blissfully blank. I was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. My stomach dropped. I'd already locked the front door. I was sure of it. "I'm sorry, we're closed," I called out without looking up, my voice steady despite the sudden spike in my pulse. Living alone in a new city had taught me to trust my instincts. And right now every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. I can see that. The voice stopped me cold. Deep, smooth, with an edge that suggested he was used to people doing exactly what he wanted. I looked up slowly, my hand tightening around the damp rag. The man standing just inside my locked door was the kind of dangerous that didn't announce itself with weapons or threats. He announced it with presence. Tall, easily, over 6 feet, with dark hair styled with casual precision, and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch storm grey, almost silver in the dim lighting, and fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, catalogued, claimed. "How did you?" I gestured weakly toward the door. "Locks are suggestions." He moved further into the cafe with the fluid grace of a predator, his hands in his pockets, utterly relaxed. "I'll make this quick. Black coffee." "However you make it." I should have refused. Should have told him to leave? Threatened to call the police? Done something other than nod and turn toward the espresso machine like a good little barista, following orders? But something about him made defiance feel dangerous, and I'd had enough danger in my life already. My hands trembled slightly as I ground fresh beans, muscle memory taking over while my mind raced. Who was he? How had he gotten through a locked door? And why was he here, in my cafe, at nearly 10 o'clock at night? I made the coffee with extra care, using the beans I reserved for myself, the ones that cost too much but tasted like heaven. If he was going to break into my workplace, he was at least going to get good coffee. When I set the cup in front of him, our fingers didn't touch, but I felt the near contact like static electricity. He wrapped both hands around the cup, inhaling the aroma with closed eyes. Something about the gesture was almost vulnerable, at odds with everything else about him. He took a sip. Then another. His eyes opened, finding mine across the counter. "Perfect," he said simply. I didn't respond. Couldn't. There was something happening here that I didn't understand, some current running beneath the surface that terrified me. He sat at the corner table, the one with the best view of the street, and drank his coffee in silence. I went back to closing duties, acutely aware of his gaze following my every movement. He didn't pull out a phone or a laptop. He just watched me work for a full hour, those silver-grey eyes never wavering. When his cup was empty, he stood, buttoned his suit jacket with practiced precision, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at me one last time. "Good night, Sophia." He knew my name. I'd never told him my name. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I stood frozen behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was only when I went to clear his table that I found them, a crisp $500 bill folded beneath the saucer, and a cream-colored business card with elegant script embossed in black. 3 words, no signature, no explanation. "You're mine now." My hands shook as I picked up the card, the expensive paper stock smooth against my fingers. I rushed to the window, pressing my face against the glass. A black Mercedes idled at the curb, its tinted windows revealing nothing. But I knew he was inside. Knew he was watching me the same way he'd watched me for the past hour. The card slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. As I bent to retrieve it, the Mercedes pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the night like dying embers. I locked up with trembling hands, checked the lock 3 times, and walked to my car with the card burning in my pocket and a single question screaming through my mind. What did he mean by mine? 3 days passed, and I almost convinced myself it had been nothing, a strange encounter. A wealthy eccentric with too much money and a taste for drama. The card stayed in my nightstand drawer, tucked beneath my spare keys where I didn't have to look at it, but couldn't quite throw it away either. I told myself the $500 was just an overly generous tip. I told myself the words meant nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid when I checked over my shoulder on my walk home, when I triple-checked my apartment locks, when I jumped at every shadow. I told myself a lot of lies those 3 days. On the 4th day, he came back. It was 7:30 a.m., peak morning rush. The cafe was packed with the usual crowd, lawyers grabbing espresso before court, hospital staff from the night shift desperately needing caffeine, students fueling up before early classes. I was in my element, moving through the controlled chaos with practiced efficiency, calling out orders, working the espresso machine, smiling at customers who barely saw me. Then the door opened and the entire energy of the room shifted. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they faltered, lowered, took on a nervous quality. I looked up from the latte I was pouring and felt my heart stop. He stood just inside the entrance wearing another expensive suit, this one charcoal grey with a black shirt beneath, no tie. His hands were in his pockets, and those storm grey eyes scanned the cafe with casual assessment before landing on me, and staying there. "Sophia, table 4 needs." My co-worker Mara's voice died mid-sentence. I heard her sharp intake of breath beside me. Oh my God, he didn't join the line. Didn't move toward the counter like every other customer. He simply stood there, waiting, as if the entire cafe existed solely for his convenience. And the terrifying thing was, people moved aside for him. Not obviously. Not all at once. But like water parting around a stone, customers shifted away, creating a clear path between us. My hands trembled as I set down the latte, earning an annoyed glance from the businessman waiting for it. But I couldn't look away from the man from him, as he crossed the cafe with that same predatory grace, stopping directly in front of my register. Up close in daylight he was even more devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and a faint scar running through his left eyebrow that only added to his dangerous appeal. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, something that reminded me of smoke and secrets. "You kept the card," he said, not a question. A statement of fact. My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." A smile ghosted across his lips, not amused, but almost approving, like he enjoyed my futile attempt at denial. "Yes, you do." "Sophia," Mara hissed beside me, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "That's Dante Rossi." The name meant nothing to me. I'd only been in the city for 6 months, kept my head down, worked my shifts, went home to my tiny studio apartment, and avoided anything that might draw attention. I didn't know the local power players, or the names whispered in shadows. But the fear in Mara's voice told me everything I needed to know. "I need you to make an espresso for table 7, I said to Mara, not taking my eyes off the man off Dante Rossi. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Now, please." Mara fled to the espresso machine like I'd thrown her a lifeline. "What do you want?" I asked Dante, keeping my voice low. Round us the cafe had resumed its normal rhythm, but I could feel curious eyes watching our exchange, feel the weight of attention even as people pretended not to stare. "I told you what I want." His voice was pitched for my ears alone, intimate despite the crowd between us. "You're mine now." "I'm not," I started, but he held up a hand. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew another card. This one had a phone number embossed in the same elegant script. He placed it on the counter between us with deliberate precision. "Call me tonight. 9 o'clock sharp." His grey eyes held mine, and I saw something flash in their depths. Not threat, but promise. "Don't be late, Sophia. And if I don't call—" The words escaped before I could stop them. Some reckless part of me refusing to be intimidated even as the rational part screamed at me to shut up and comply. His smile widened a fraction, revealing perfect white teeth. "You will." He turned and walked out, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully in his wake, at complete odds with the ice flooding my veins. The moment he was gone, Mara grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Are you insane? Do you know who that is? Dante Rossi controls half the underground economy in this city. The police won't touch him. The mayor takes his calls. She lowered her voice to a terrified whisper. People who cross him disappear, Sophia. I stared at the card on the counter, at the phone number that looked like a trap disguised as an invitation. Why me? I whispered, but Mara had no answer. Neither did I. I spent the entire day trying to convince myself I wouldn't call. At noon, I told myself it was ridiculous. At 3, I reasoned that ignoring him was the safest option. At 6, I researched Dante Rossi on my phone and immediately wished I hadn't. The search results were a mix of legitimate business profiles, real estate development, luxury hotels, import-export, and carefully worded news articles about alleged connections to organized crime. There were photos of him at charity galas, at city council meetings, shaking hands with the mayor. And there were older articles, ones about bodies found in the harbor, about witnesses who recanted testimony, about a detective who'd gotten too close to the Rossi family and took early retirement after his daughter's car brakes mysteriously failed. I should have run. Should have packed my meager belongings, withdrawn what little cash I had, and disappeared into another city with another name like I'd done before. Instead, at 8:45 p.m., I sat on my thrift store couch in my studio apartment, staring at the card with the phone number, my thumb hovering over the digits on my phone screen. Why was I even considering this? What kind of person receives a threatening message from a crime boss and thinks, yes, let me voluntarily call him? The same kind of person who'd already run once and was tired of running. The same kind of person who recognized something in those grey eyes, something that said he understood what it meant to be hunted. At 8:59, I dialed. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been holding the phone, waiting. Sophia. My name in his voice, smooth as aged whiskey. Not a question, a confirmation. You're punctual. I appreciate that. You said 9 o'clock. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I'm nothing if not obedient to breaking and entering, stalkers who leave cryptic cards. A low laugh rumbled through the phone, rich and genuinely amused. Is that what I am, isn't it? I prefer to think of myself as observant. I heard the sound of liquid being poured whiskey, probably, or something equally expensive. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, Sophia. Not 3 days. 3 weeks. Ice flooded my veins. What? The way you move through the world, he continued, his voice taking on a contemplative quality. Careful, invisible. You take different routes home every night. You never sit with your back to the door. You scan every face in the cafe like you're memorizing them, looking for one that doesn't belong. He paused. You're afraid of being seen. I want to know why. My hand tightened around the phone. 3 weeks. He'd been watching me for 3 weeks, and I hadn't noticed. How had I not noticed? Maybe I'm just cautious, I managed. Cautious people lock their doors. Terrified people check them 3 times. His words were soft, but they hit like physical blows. You're running from something. Or someone. I should have hung up. Should have denied everything. Instead, I found myself whispering, How do you know that? Because I recognized the look in your eyes, Sophia. I've seen it in the mirror. Something shifted in his tone of vulnerability that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I can protect you from it. Whatever it is, whoever it is. Why would you do that? My voice cracked on the question. You don't know me, don't I? He took a sip of his drink. I heard the ice clink against glass. Sophia Bennett, 26 years old. Moved to the city 6 months ago from Portland. No family, no close friends. You work double shifts at the cafe and a weekend job at the bookstore on 5th. You live alone in a studio apartment you pay for in cash. No credit cards, no social media. No digital footprint before 6 months ago. Oh God, you changed your name, Dante continued, relentless. Not legally. That would leave a trail. Just started using a different one. But Bennett isn't the name you were born with, is it? Tears burned my eyes. Stop! His name is Marcus. Dante's voice went cold, deadly. Marcus Chun, your ex-boyfriend. The one who put you in the hospital twice before you finally ran. The one who told you he'd find you wherever you went. The one you're still having nightmares about. A sob caught in my throat. How do you? I make it my business to know everything about people who interest me. He let that sink in for a moment. And you, Sophia, interest me very much. This is insane. I stood, pacing my tiny apartment. You don't have the right to. Marcus filed a change of address form with the Postal Service 2 days ago, Dante interrupted, his voice cutting through my panic like a blade. His new address is 3 blocks from your apartment. 724 Maple Street, Unit 3B. The world tilted. My apartment was on Maple Street, 412 Maple, 3 blocks. He found you, Sophia. Dante's words were gentle now, almost sympathetic. And men like Marcus don't file change of address forms because they're ready to let go. They do it because they're planning something. I sank back onto the couch, my legs no longer able to support me. What do you want from me? I want you to meet me tomorrow. I'll text you an address. His voice softened further. I'm not your enemy, Sophia. But Marcus is. And I'm the only thing standing between you and him right now. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, staring at my phone, Marcus's name echoing in my mind like a curse. 3 blocks away, he'd found me. The address Dante texted me led to a high-rise in the financial district, the kind of building where doormen wore white gloves and knew better than to ask questions. The penthouse elevator required a keycard that had been waiting for me at the front desk, my name already on the envelope. Of course he'd known I would come. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, not a hallway, not a foyer, just straight into a space that could only be described as obscene wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars. Everything was clean lines and expensive materials. Marble, leather, dark wood that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. Dante stood by the windows, backlit by the city, wearing dark jeans and a fitted black shirt that made him look less like a mob boss and more like some dangerous work of art. He turned as I entered, and I saw something flicker in his expression, relief, maybe, that I'd actually shown up. Wine? He gestured to a bottle breathing on the counter, already poured into 2 glasses. My voice echoed in the cavernous space. I want to know what this is about. All of it. A small smile curved his lips. Direct. I like that. He picked up 1 glass, leaving the other for me if I changed my mind. Sit, please. I remained standing. I'm fine here. Suit yourself. He took a sip, studying me over the rim of the glass. I have a proposition for you, Sophia, one that benefits us both. I can't imagine what I have that you could possibly want. I need a wife. The words hung in the air between us, so absurd I almost laughed. I'm sorry, what? A wife. He set down his glass with deliberate precision. And you need protection and a new identity. We both get what we want. You're insane. I took a step backward toward the elevator. This is insane, is it? He moved toward a leather portfolio on the coffee table, opening it to reveal photographs. Come look at these. Then tell me I'm insane. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, drew me forward. I looked down at the photographs and felt my stomach drop. Marcus, outside my apartment building, sitting in his car across from the cafe, following me to the bookstore. In every photo, his focus was laser-sharp, predatory. The time-stamps showed they were recent, some from yesterday, some from this morning. He's escalating, Dante said quietly, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne. Men like Marcus always do. Right now he's just watching. Soon he'll make contact. Then he'll make his move. I couldn't tear my eyes from the photos. In one, Marcus was parked outside my building at 2 a.m., just sitting there in the darkness, watching my window. How long have you been following him? I whispered. Since I started following you, I wanted to know why you were running. Dante's voice was matter of fact, as if surveillance was a perfectly normal courtship ritual. So when I found him, I understood, and your solution is marriage. I looked up at him, trying to read the expression in those grey eyes. That's your grand plan? Let me explain the situation. He gestured for me to sit, and this time I did, my legs too weak to keep standing. He settled into the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. There's a family, the Castellanos, who've been pressuring me to form an alliance through marriage. To their daughter, Valentina. So marry her, I said, though something in my chest tightened at the thought. She's vindictive, manipulative, and already sleeping with 3 of my competitors. His jaw tightened. The marriage would be a leash, not an alliance. They want control of my operations, and Valentina is their Trojan horse, and I'm your escape clause. Exactly. He pulled out another folder, this one containing legal documents. If I'm already married when they make their formal proposal next month, the deal is void. They can't force an alliance if I'm already committed. I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. This is a business arrangement, yes. 1 year you play the role of devoted wife in public. You live here, under my protection. Marcus can't touch you as my wife, legally or otherwise. When the year is over, you get a divorce, a completely new legal identity, and $2 million. Enough to disappear anywhere in the world and start fresh. $2 million. A new identity. Freedom from Marcus. It sounded too good to be true. And what do you get besides avoiding Valentina? I asked, suspicion creeping in. Something flickered across his face, something vulnerable. He quickly masked. Peace. A year without the Castellanos breathing down my neck. Time to solidify my position. He paused. And the satisfaction of knowing Marcus can't hurt you anymore. Why do you care if he hurts me? The question escaped before I could stop it. Dante leaned back, his grey eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. Because I know what it's like to be helpless against someone who wants to destroy you. I know what it's like to run and still wake up in cold sweats, wondering if today is the day they finally catch you. His voice dropped. I can make Marcus disappear, Sophia, permanently. 1 phone call, and he's gone. Murder, I whispered. Justice. His expression remained neutral. But if that's too far for you, we do this legally. You become my wife, he can't touch you, and in 1 year you're free. Your choice. I looked down at the photographs again, at Marcus's face twisted with obsession. Freedom or blood? The devil I didn't know, or the devil I did? I need time to think, I said. You have until tomorrow morning. Dante stood, moving to the window. But Sophia? Don't take too long. Marcus isn't going to wait. I said yes at 6:47 a.m. Standing in my apartment with Marcus's face staring at me from the photographs spread across my coffee table, Dante answered on the first ring as if he'd been awake all night waiting. I'll do it, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. I'll marry you. Silence. Then you won't regret this. I already did. But regret was a luxury I couldn't afford. 72 hours later, I stood in a courthouse that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, wearing a simple white dress Dante had sent to my apartment that morning. It fit perfectly, of course. He seemed to know everything about me, down to my exact measurements. The ceremony room was aggressively beige fluorescent lights, metal chairs, a tired-looking judge who'd probably married a dozen couples that morning and would marry a dozen more before lunch. There were 2 witnesses I didn't recognize, men in expensive suits who watched with the blank expressions of people paid very well to forget what they'd seen. Dante stood beside me in a charcoal suit, his presence the only thing that felt real in the sterile space. He'd been nothing but professional since I'd agreed to his proposition, a few brief texts about logistics. A contract reviewed by a lawyer he'd provided, arrangements made with ruthless efficiency. But now, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, I saw tension in the set of his shoulders, in the way his jaw tightened when the judge began reading the vows. Do you, Dante Michael Rossi, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, absolute, but his eyes, when they met mine, held something that made my breath catch. Not love. We barely knew each other. Something darker. Something that looked like possession. And do you, Sophia Marie Bennett, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? My mouth went dry. This was it. The point of no return. Once I said these words, I became his wife, legally bound to a man who controlled half the city's criminal enterprises, who'd been watching me for weeks, who offered murder as casually as other men offered flowers. I do. The words escaped in a whisper. The judge nodded, already reaching for the marriage certificate. By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Dante turned to me, and I saw a flicker of something, hesitation, maybe, or the awareness that this was our first real touch beyond accidental brushes of fingers. Then he reached for my hand, his fingers warm and sure around mine, and lifted it to his lips. Not my mouth, my hand. The kiss was soft, reverent almost, but his eyes never left mine, and in that moment, with his lips pressed to my knuckles and the cool metal of the wedding band he'd just placed there, I felt the full weight of what I'd agreed to. I was his now, at least on paper. We signed documents in silence, my hand shaking slightly as I wrote Sophia Rossi for the first time. The name looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Someone braver. Someone who knew what she was doing. Sophia Bennett. The girl who'd fled Portland in the middle of the night with nothing but a backpack and terror in her heart, ceased to exist with the stroke of a pen. The witnesses signed. The judge stamped. And just like that, I was married to the most dangerous man in the city. Dante's hand settled at the small of my back as we left the courthouse, guiding me toward a black Mercedes idling at the curb. The touch was possessive, protective. Everything about him seemed to exist in those contradictions. The mansion is secure, he said as we slid into the back seat. I've tripled security since you agreed. Marcus won't get within a mile of you. Thank you, I managed, though the word felt inadequate. He studied my face for a long moment. Are you afraid of me, Sophia? I considered lying. Considered saying no to maintain some illusion of control, but something about the directness of his gaze demanded honesty. Yes, I admitted. Should I be? Not if you're mine. His voice dropped, intimate despite the driver separated from us by a privacy screen. I protect what belongs to me. The mansion was even more intimidating than I'd imagined from Dante's descriptions, a sprawling estate with walls, topped with security cameras and guards stationed at intervals that tried to look decorative, but were clearly strategic. Money and power announced themselves in the manicured gardens. The fountain at the circular driveway, the sheer space that screamed ownership. Dante led me through rooms that blurred together in their elegance, marble and crystal and art that probably belonged in museums. Staff members appeared and disappeared like ghosts, nodding to him with practiced deference. Finally, he stopped before a door in the east wing. This is your suite. He opened it to reveal a bedroom larger than my entire apartment had been. A king-size bed dominated the space, dressed in soft grey linens. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens. Everything was tasteful, expensive, beautiful, and mine. The closet is stocked, Dante said, gesturing to a door that probably led to a walk-in the size of a normal bedroom. Anything you need that isn't here, tell Maria. She's the housekeeper. She'll get it for you. I nodded, overwhelmed. Sophia. He waited until I looked at him. I won't enter this room without your permission. This is your space. You're safe here. Safe in a cage is still a cage, I said before I could stop myself. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger, but something closer to understanding. A cage with an open door. You can leave whenever you want. He moved toward the door, then paused. But you won't. Because out there Marcus is waiting. He was right. And we both knew it. Welcome home, Mrs. Rossi, he said softly, and then he was gone. I stood alone in my beautiful prison, a stranger's ring on my finger and a stranger's name erasing my past, and wondered what kind of person I'd have to become to survive this. The first 2 weeks were a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Dante left for his office before I woke, his side of the mansion silent and sealed off like a separate world. We ate dinner together each evening, his rule, not mine, in the formal dining room with Maria's serving courses that were too elegant for my pedestrian palate. He asked about my day. I gave one-word answers. He told me about business deals that skirted the line between legal and not. I pretended not to understand the implications. We were strangers wearing wedding rings, playing house in a mansion that echoed with everything we didn't say, until the cracks began to show. It started with a nightmare on the 14th night. Marcus in my dreams, breaking through my apartment door with that smile that promised pain. I woke gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, my screams still echoing in the darkness. I expected silence, expected to cry alone in my beautiful cage until dawn. Instead, my door opened slowly, tentatively, and Dante appeared in the doorway, barefoot in black pajama pants and nothing else. His hair was disheveled, his chest rising and falling with breath that suggested he'd run. "Sophia?" His voice was rough with sleep and concern. "I heard you scream. I'm fine." The lie cracked halfway through. Just a dream. He should have left. We had rules unspoken but clear. But instead he crossed the threshold of my room for the first time since I'd moved in. He didn't approach the bed, just sank into the armchair by the window, his body backlit by moonlight streaming through the French doors. "Tell me about it," he said quietly. "It's nothing. You don't have to. I'm not leaving." His tone left no room for argument. "So you can talk, or we can sit in silence until dawn. Your choice." So I talked. About Marcus's hands around my throat. About the hospital stays I'd lied about, calling them accidents. About the final night when I'd realized it was run or die, and I'd chosen to run with nothing but the clothes on my back, and fear as my only companion. Dante listened without interruption, his grey eyes reflecting the moonlight. When I finally fell silent, tears dried on my cheeks, he simply nodded. "He'll never touch you again," he said. A promise, not a comfort. We sat like that until dawn painted the sky, Pinkham in the chair, me in my bed, the silence between us no longer empty, but filled with understanding. The second crack appeared 3 nights later when I couldn't sleep, and wandered the mansion at 3 a.m., drawn by music floating through the corridors. I followed the sound to a room I'd never entered, Dante's private study, where the door stood ajar. He sat at a grand piano, his fingers moving over the keys with heartbreaking skill, coaxing out a melody so mournful it made my chest ache. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the music, and in that moment he looked younger, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. I must have made a sound because his eyes opened, finding me in the doorway. "I didn't know you played," I said softly. "My mother taught me." His hand stilled on the keys. "Before she died." I took a step into the room. "It's beautiful, it's sad." He looked down at the keys. "I only ever play sad songs anymore." "Maybe you need happier memories," I offered. Something shifted in his expression. "Maybe I do." After that, we began talking real conversations that went beyond polite dinner small talk. We discovered we'd both lost our mothers young, both knew what it meant to survive rather than live, both carried scars that didn't show on the surface. The carefully maintained distance eroded a little more each day. By the 3rd week, when Dante announced we'd be attending a charity gala together, our first public appearance as a married couple, I felt something dangerous stirring in my chest. Something that looked uncomfortably like anticipation. "You'll need a dress," he said over breakfast, sliding a black credit card across the table. "Whatever you want. Price isn't a concern. I can use my own money. You're my wife now, Sophia. Even if it's pretend, the world needs to believe it's real." His eyes held mine. "Let me take care of you." The dress I chose was midnight blue silk, elegant without being ostentatious. When I descended the stairs the night of the gala, Dante was waiting in the foyer in a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a dark fantasy. His eyes traveled over me slowly, appreciatively. "You're stunning." Heat bloomed in my cheeks. "Thank you." At the gala, I learned what it meant to be Mrs. Dante Rossi. People parted for us like we were royalty. Men looked at me with envy or fear, depending on whether they were looking at my face or my husband. Women assessed me with calculating eyes, trying to determine how I'd managed to capture the city's most dangerous bachelor. I played my role perfectly, the devoted wife, laughing at his jokes, leaning into his touch when his hand settled at the small of my back. But somewhere between the champagne and the orchestra, the acting started to feel less like pretense and more like truth. Then a business associate, older, with predatory eyes and too much cologne, made a comment about my neckline being generous, while his gaze lingered inappropriately. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Dante's response was soft, conversational, and absolutely terrifying. "Speak about my wife that way again, and they'll never find your body." The man paled and retreated so quickly he nearly knocked over a waiter. I should have been horrified. Should have been reminded of exactly who and what Dante was beneath the expensive tuxedo. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, I felt safe. In the car ride home, Dante's jaw was still tight with barely controlled rage. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." His head whipped toward me. "You're apologizing." "Sophia, that bastard disrespected you. He's lucky I only threatened him." "You defended me, of course I did." His voice softened. "You're mine to protect." The possessiveness in those words should have frightened me. Instead, it made my heart race for entirely different reasons. It happened on a Tuesday. Rain hammered against the windows of the mansion, turning the world outside into watercolor smears of grey and green. I'd spent the day in the kitchen, something I did when I needed to feel normal. Human, like a person who made choices rather than someone who'd sold herself for protection. Maria had tried to insist she'd handle dinner, but I'd shooed her away. Needing the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables, the therapeutic violence of kneading bread dough. Cooking was meditation. Cooking was control. I was at the stove, stirring risotto, when I heard the front door open earlier than usual. Dante's footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, but something was off about their cadence, heavier, less controlled than his usual predatory grace. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I nearly dropped my wooden spoon. He was soaked through, his shirt plastered to his chest, water dripping from his dark hair onto the expensive marble floor. His jaw was tight, his eyes storm dark, and there was something wild in his expression that I'd never seen before, something barely leashed. "What happened?" I asked, already moving toward him. "Meeting ran long." Rain came out of nowhere. His voice was rough, strained. "I forgot my umbrella." Such a normal thing, forgetting an umbrella. It made him seem almost human. I grabbed a dish towel from the counter without thinking, crossing the space between us to hand it to him. "You're going to catch." Our fingers brushed as he took the towel. The contact was brief, innocent, but electricity arced between us like lightning, and suddenly neither of us was breathing. His eyes locked on mine, grey deepening to slate, and I saw my own want reflected back at me, Sophia. My name was a warning in his throat. "We should talk about." I kissed him. It was reckless, impulsive, crossing every carefully drawn line we'd maintained for 3 weeks. But I was tired of pretending, tired of lying to myself that the flutter in my chest when he looked at me was just gratitude, that the way my body responded to his proximity was just chemistry, that this arrangement was purely business. For a heartbeat he froze, shocked, perhaps, that I'd made the first move. Then something in him snapped. He dropped the towel, and his hands framed my face like I was something precious and breakable. His kiss transforming from surprise to claiming in seconds. He tasted like rain and coffee and want, his mouth moving against mine with controlled hunger that made my knees weak. "Are you sure?" He breathed against my lips, pulling back just enough to search my eyes. "Sophia, I need you to be sure. Not because of our arrangement. Not because you feel obligated. Because you want. I silenced him with another kiss, deeper this time, my fingers tangling in his wet hair. I want, I whispered against his mouth. God help me, Dante, but I want this. I want you. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Then you're mine, he growled. No more pretending. No more separate rooms. No more acting. Yes, I breathed, and the word broke whatever restraint he'd been clinging to. He lifted me onto the kitchen counter with surprising ease, stepping between my legs, his hands everywhere, my face, my hair, my waist. The risotto on the stove was forgotten. Everything was forgotten except the feeling of his body against mine, the desperate way we reached for each other like drowning people reaching for air. Bedroom I managed between kisses. We should hear, he corrected, his lips trailing down my neck. Now, I've waited 3 weeks. I'm not waiting another second. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was dangerous. Knew that adding real feelings to this arrangement would complicate everything, make the eventual separation in 9 months that much harder. But as Dante's hands traced patterns of fire across my skin, as his mouth found mine again with devastating precision, I couldn't bring myself to care about consequences. Later, much later, we lay tangled together in his bed. We'd eventually made it upstairs. The rain still drumming against the windows. My head rested on his bare chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my shoulder. This changes things, I said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Yes, his voice rumbled through his chest. It does. I propped myself up on one elbow to look at him. The arrangement isn't an arrangement anymore. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his grey eyes intense. I told you the first night we spoke, Sophia. You're mine now. But that means I'm yours too. His thumb brushed across my lower lip. No more pretending this is just business. No more separate rooms. No more carefully maintained distance. What are we then? I whispered, almost afraid of the answer. He pulled me down for a kiss that was softer than before, tender in a way that made my chest ache. Husband and wife. For real this time. We barely know each other. A smile curved his lips. We have 9 months to fix that. 9 months. The reminder of our contract's end date should have been comforting, a clear exit strategy, a defined endpoint. Instead, it felt like a countdown to loss. But that was a problem for future Sophia. Present Sophia was warm and safe in the arms of a dangerous man who looked at her like she was something worth protecting, worth claiming, worth keeping. No regrets? Dante asked, echoing a question I suspected he'd asked himself 1,000 times. I thought about Marcus, about the life I'd left behind, about the fact that I'd married a stranger to escape one nightmare, and somehow found myself falling into something that felt like a dream. No regrets, I said, and kissed him to seal the promise. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last remnants of the careful distance we'd maintained. We were no longer captor and captive, benefactor and beneficiary, stranger and stranger playing house. We were something infinitely more dangerous. We were real. 3 weeks of bliss shattered on a Thursday morning. I woke to shouting, angry voices carrying through the open bedroom window. Dante was already out of bed, pulling on jeans with controlled urgency, his expression carved from ice. "Stay here," he commanded, reaching into the nightstand for something I'd never seen before. A gun, matte black and deadly. Terror flooded my veins. "Dante, Marcus is at the gate." The world tilted. I scrambled out of bed, pulling on Dante's discarded shirt, following him despite his order to stay. By the time I reached the front entrance, 6 security guards had assembled, all armed, all focused on the front gate visible through the security monitors. And there he was, Marcus Chun, looking exactly as he did in my nightmare's sandy hair, average build, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Except now his features were twisted with rage, and in his hands he held a gun pointed at the security camera and a bouquet of roses. Dead roses. Blackened and wilted, tied with wire instead of ribbon. "I know you're in there, Sophie." His voice crackled through the intercom using the name only he had called me. The name I'd buried along with the girl who'd loved him before she learned what his love actually meant. You think you can hide behind some rich bastard? You think I won't find you? Dante's hand found mine, squeezing tight enough to hurt. How long has he been there? He asked his head of security, a man named Vincent. 10 minutes. He showed up in a rental car, started screaming for Sophia. Vincent's voice was professionally calm. We've already called the police. 8 or 5 minutes. Tell Sophia I'm not done with her. Marcus screamed, firing a shot into the air. The security guards tensed, hands moving to their weapons. Tell her new husband he's a dead man. You hear me? Dead. I felt Dante's entire body go rigid beside me, his fury a palpable thing. When he spoke, his voice was lethally soft. I want him eliminated. Tonight. No. The word escaped before I could think. Dante. No. He turned to me, eyes storm dark. He just threatened to kill me and came here with a weapon, Sophia. He's not leaving you alone. I know, but I struggled to articulate the fear clawing at my chest. I won't start our real life together with blood on our hands. There has to be another way. There isn't. His voice was flat, absolute. In my world, threats are removed, permanently. Then maybe we do it the legal way, I insisted, desperation making me bold. Restraining orders, police involvement. We do this right, Dante. He stared at me like I'd spoken in tongues. In his world, the world of power and violence problems were solved with brutal efficiency, not courtrooms and paperwork. But I saw the moment he yielded, saw something in his expression soften despite the rage simmering beneath. We'll try it your way, he said finally. But Sophia, if this doesn't work, it will work, I interrupted, needing to believe it. It didn't work. The police arrived and arrested Marcus for trespassing, weapons charges, terroristic threats. A judge granted an emergency restraining order. Our lawyer, a woman who clearly knew exactly who Dante was and feared him appropriately, assured us Marcus would face serious jail time. 24 hours later, Marcus violated the restraining order. 48 hours later, he was out on bail. 72 hours later, he broke into our home. We'd been at a dinner with business associates, part of maintaining the image of normalcy, of a loving couple going about their lives. We returned to find a window shattered in my old suite, the room ransacked, my belongings torn and scattered. On the bed, written in what I prayed was paint, but suspected was blood. Mine. I stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. This was my fault. I'd insisted on the legal route. I'd stopped Dante from handling this the first time. And now Marcus had been inside our home, touching my things, leaving his mark, claiming me even in absence. Vincent, sweep the entire property, Dante ordered, his voice diamond hard. I want to know how he got past security. I want heads rolling by morning. He turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Not anger, though that was there too, but hurt. You could have been here. If we'd come home 10 minutes earlier, I'm sorry. The words cracked halfway through. You were right. I should have. No. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me like a fortress. You wanted to believe in a system that doesn't work for people like us. I understand that. But now you see. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. Now you understand that some threats can't be handled with restraining orders and courtrooms. I looked past him at the word on my bed. Mine. Marcus's final declaration of ownership. But I wasn't his. Not anymore. Do what you have to do, I whispered, the words ash in my mouth. Make him disappear, Dante. I can't. A sob caught in my throat. I can't live like this, waiting for him to hurt us. Waiting for him to. He won't hurt anyone ever again, Dante promised, his voice soft and terrible. I'll handle it. I don't want to know how. You won't. He kissed my forehead, gentle despite the violence promised in his words. Go to our room. Lock the door. I'll take care of this, I should have argued. Should have insisted on knowing details, on being part of the decision. But fear had stripped away my moral high ground, leaving only the desperate need to be safe. So I went to our bedroom and locked the door. And I didn't ask questions when Dante came home 4 hours later with scratched knuckles and eyes that had seen dark things. I just held him and tried not to think about the price we'd paid for peace. Marcus disappeared. Dante didn't tell me how, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that 2 days after I gave permission, 2 days after, I whispered, "Do what you have to do." Dante came home in the early hours of dawn with scratched knuckles and eyes that had witnessed things I couldn't imagine. He went straight to the shower, staying under the water so long I worried he'd never come out. When he finally emerged, dressed in fresh clothes with his wet hair pushed back, he found me sitting on the edge of our bed, waiting. "It's done," he said simply. "Marcus won't hurt you again. Won't hurt anyone. I should have asked for details. Should have demanded to know exactly what done meant. Instead, I just nodded, and we never spoke his name again. The first few days were strange. I kept expecting to feel guilt, horror at what I'd sanctioned. I waited for the crushing weight of moral compromise to descend, for nightmares about what Dante had done in my name. Instead, I felt free. The constant tension that had lived in my shoulders for 3 years evaporated. I stopped checking over my shoulder when I left the house. I stopped triple-checking locks before bed. I stopped startling awake at every sound, certain Marcus had found me again. The fear was gone. And in its absence, I discovered something terrifying. I didn't regret what we'd done. Not even a little. A week after Marcus's disappearance, I found Dante on the terrace at 3 a.m., staring out at the city lights with a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The moonlight caught the hard lines of his profile, making him look carved from marble, beautiful and cold and utterly alone. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly, stepping out into the cool night air. He didn't turn. "I keep thinking about what you must think of me now, what you've seen me become." I moved to stand beside him, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "I think you did what I asked you to do, what I couldn't do myself. That doesn't make it right." His voice was rough, raw. "I killed a man, Sophia. Not in self-defense, not in the heat of the moment. I planned it, executed it, and made sure there would be no trace left behind." He finally looked at me, and I saw guilt etched into every line of his face. "I'm a monster. You should be horrified. Are you?" I asked quietly. "Am I what? Horrified? Do you regret it?" He was silent for a long moment. "I regret that you had to ask me to do it. I regret that he pushed you to that point. But removing him from the world?" He shook his head. "No, I don't regret that. He was going to keep coming. He was going to hurt you. Or worse. I'd do it again without hesitation." I took the whiskey from his hand and set it on the railing. Then I took his face between my palms, forcing him to look at me. "I'm not afraid of who you are, Dante. Not anymore. Not after this. You should be," he whispered. "Maybe." I stroked my thumb across his cheekbone, "But I'm not." "You want to know what I feel?" "Relief. Freedom. Gratitude that you're willing to walk through darkness so I don't have to." I leaned in closer. "You think that makes me a monster too?" "Maybe it does. Maybe we're both monsters now. But I'll choose you anyway." Something broke in his expression, a damn giving way to emotion he'd been holding back. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me like I was the only solid thing in his world. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against my hair. "Probably not," I agreed, making him laugh despite everything. "But you're stuck with me anyway. For better or worse, remember? We said those words. We did." He pulled back to look at me, his grey eyes searching mine. 9 months, Sophia. That's all that's left on our contract. When the year is up, don't." I pressed my fingers to his lips. "Don't think about endings. Not tonight." But I knew what he was asking. When our arrangement expired, when I had my new identity and my $2 million, would I stay? Or would I take my freedom and run? The girl who'd fled Portland in the middle of the night would have run without looking back. The girl who'd been terrified of the dangerous man in the expensive suit would have counted down the days until escape. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was Sophia Rossi, wife to a man who'd killed for me, who'd walked through fire to keep me safe. I was a woman who'd looked at her own darkness and chosen it willingly. I was someone who understood that love wasn't always clean or simple or morally pure. Sometimes love was choosing the monster because he was your monster. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him, the words a vow more binding than any we'd spoken in that courthouse. "Contract or no contract, Ante, I choose this. I choose you. All of you. The darkness, the violence, the terrible things you're capable of." I kissed him softly. "Because you're also the man who sat with me until dawn when I had nightmares. Who plays sad songs on the piano at 3 a.m. Who looks at me like I'm something worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth keeping. Sophia." My name was reverence and relief. "I'm yours," I whispered against his lips. "Completely. Forever. Not because of our arrangement, not because I need protection, but because somewhere between the fear and the fighting and the falling, I fell in love with you." He kissed me then, deep and claiming, and full of promises neither of us could put into words. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I loved you the moment you looked at me in that courthouse and said, 'I do,'" he confessed. "Maybe even before that. From the first time I saw you making coffee with such fierce concentration, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. I was lost then, just didn't know it yet. We stood on the terrace as dawn broke over the city, washing away the darkness with shades of pink and gold. And I understood that some choices weren't about right or wrong. They were about choosing who you wanted to be and who you wanted beside you when the world got dark. I'd chosen Dante Rossi, monster, protector, husband, love. I'd chosen myself, too, the version who survived, who fought, who refused to be a victim ever again. No regrets. 6 months later, I stood in a garden that shouldn't exist. Dante had commissioned it specifically for Tadea, hidden sanctuary on the mansion grounds, walled in by climbing roses and wisteria that cascaded like purple waterfalls. White chairs arranged in neat rows held the few people we'd invited, Maria and Vincent, Marco, the head of security who'd become an unexpected friend, and a handful of Dante's associates who'd proven themselves trustworthy enough to witness something real. No judge this time. No sterile courthouse with fluorescent lights and bored witnesses. This was ours. A choice made freely, without desperation or contracts or escape clauses. I wore cream silk that moved like water, flowers woven into my hair by Maria's gentle hands. Dante stood at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored suit. And when his eyes met mine, I saw everything we'd survived reflected back. The fear, the violence, the darkness we'd walked through to find each other. But mostly I saw love. The ceremony was simple. No traditional vows, we'd already spoken those in a courthouse a year ago. Instead, Dante had written something new, words that made my throat tight and my eyes burn. "A year ago, I offered you protection and called it a business arrangement," he said. His voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I told myself I was being practical, strategic. But the truth is, I was a coward. I wanted you from the moment I saw you, but I didn't have the courage to simply ask. So I built a cage of contracts and conditions, hoping you'd choose to stay. He reached for my hands, his fingers warm and sure around mine. "But you didn't stay because of the contract. You stayed because somewhere in the darkness you found something worth keeping. You stayed because you saw me, all of me, the violence and the scars and the terrible things I've done, and you chose me anyway." His voice dropped. "I don't deserve you, Sophia. But I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. Not because of what I can give you, but because you've given me something I thought I'd lost. The ability to be human, to be soft, to be loved." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I squeezed his hands. "My turn," I said, and he smiled through his own suspiciously bright eyes. "When you walked into my cafe that first night, I thought you were the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. And I was right. But not for the reasons I thought." I took a shaky breath. "You terrified me because you saw me, really saw me. Not the invisible barista. Not the girl hiding from her past. You saw who I could be if I stopped running. If I stopped being afraid. You offered me protection. And I took it because I was desperate. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need protection from the world. I needed permission to stop hiding in it. You gave me that. I reached up to touch his face, his familiar features, the scar through his eyebrow I'd traced 100 times. I'm not afraid anymore, Dante. Not of you, not of what we've done, not of who I've become. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The officiante, a woman whose discretion Dante paid for, handsomely pronounced us husband and wife for the second time. But it felt like the first. Like everything before had been prologued. When Dante kissed me, it tasted like promises and forever. The reception was held on the terrace where we'd shared so many dinners and confessions. As the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Dante pulled me aside. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket. My heart stuttered when I saw what he held. A cream-colored card, identical to the one he'd left at the cafe a year ago. Dante opened it. My hands trembled as I turned it over. The same elegant script, but different words this time. You're mine. I'm yours. Forever. I looked up at him through tears I didn't bother hiding. I kept the original, you know. It's in my nightstand. I know. He smiled. I've seen it there. That's how I knew. Knew what? That you'd stay. That this was real. He tucked the new card into my palm. Keep them both. A reminder of where we started and where we are now. I threw my arms around his neck, not caring that we had guests, not caring about anything except the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against mine. No regrets, he murmured against my hair, the question he'd asked 100 times, the answer that mattered more than any vow. I pulled back to look at him, this dangerous, complicated, beloved man who'd given me everything I never knew I needed. Only that I didn't walk into your world sooner, I said, echoing words from another lifetime, another version of myself who'd been too afraid to reach for what she wanted. He kissed me again, softer this time, a promise sealed in the fading light. Around us, the garden party continued, laughter and music and the clinking of champagne glasses. Maria caught my eye and winked. Vincent nodded his approval. The world kept turning, indifferent to the miracle happening in this small corner of it. I was Sophia Rossi, not because a contract said so, but because I'd chosen it, chosen him, chosen us. We weren't a fairy tale. Our foundation was built on desperation and violence and moral compromises that would horrify decent people. We were darkness finding darkness and calling it light. But we were also real. Messy and complicated and absolutely devastatingly real. As night fell and stars emerged overhead, Dante pulled me close, his lips brushing my temple. Dance with me, Mrs. Rossi. Forever, Mr. Rossi, I replied, and meant it with every fiber of my being. We swayed together under the stars, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. Two survivors who'd stopped running long enough to build something worth protecting. Mine and his and mine, forever.